Believing that you're destined for heaven when you're not would be the most tragic self-deception. David Servant's book, The Great Gospel Deception, will help you be sure that heaven will be your eternal home. Order your copy at heavenword.tv.
All right, welcome back. We are, in Daniel chapter 11. You know how we got here from Matthew chapter 24 and looking at the Abomination of Desolation. We've seen that the Antichrist is foreshadowed by this guy Antiochus Epiphanes, who desecrated the temple in Jerusalem in about 167 BC. But Jesus said it was going to happen sometime after when he was speaking in AD 33. And there's evidence in 2 Thessalonians, I just read that to you, that the abomination of desolation, of which Jesus spoke of, is actually the Antichrist himself walking into the temple and declaring himself to be God. Now, let me just talk a little about the Antichrist, just so you get the context here. The Antichrist is someone whom the world thinks is the Christ, and all those who are deceived by him, think he's the greatest thing that ever happened because he does these marvelous miracles. He's this very skillful leader, and he rises during a time of great distress and turmoil in the world and brings a degree of peace. He's a man of war himself, but it's the signs and wonders that get people, and so the whole world chases after him, and probably there's most people are convinced this is the Messiah, this is someone divine, this is God. They're just waiting with bated breath to hear him make the announcement. And apparently he will make that announcement. He's going to, at one point in time, walk into the temple and, as Paul said, take his seat in the temple of God, displaying himself as being God. Now, when Paul wrote that to the Thessalonians, the temple in Jerusalem was still standing. It wasn't destroyed, remember, until 70 AD. And so this raises all kinds of questions. It raised a lot of questions for hundreds of years because no one believed after the temple was destroyed that the temple could ever be rebuilt because, the Jews didn't even have a homeland of Israel in which they could build a temple, and it looked like it was a complete impossibility. But since 1948, all those who studied eschatology had to, revise their books and say, well, it is a possibility. Israel has become a nation. And, it still seems like such a far-fetched idea that ever, that the temple could be rebuilt in Jerusalem in its original location. Because right now, there is, the second holiest site in Islam in that same location, this Dome of the Rock Mosque, which I'm sure you've seen the gold dome and all the pictures of Jerusalem that are taken from the Mount of Olives. And so it's going to be interesting to see, if we're understanding this correctly, the temple has to be rebuilt. And that's going to take some major doing, isn't it? Some people would stone me if they could just to hear me say this because they consider it such a horrible, horrible thing. Some people say that the Antichrist taking his seat in the temple of God is actually a reference to him taking a position of great leadership in the church, because sometimes the church is referred to the temple of God. I object to that because the false church is never referred to as the temple of God. It's the great whore, but it's not the temple of God. And so the Antichrist is never going to take a seat in the true church of God, the temple of God, and display himself as being God. He'll only deceive those who can be deceived. The true believers will not be able to be deceived. Okay, enough said. Now, we're reading about this guy Antiochus Epiphanes who foreshadows the Antichrist. He was a blasphemous guy himself. He desecrated the temple with the abomination of desolation of sorts. But we keep on reading here in verse number 36 of Daniel chapter 11, and we've just got 3 minutes and 30 seconds. Then the king will do as he pleases. He will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and will speak monstrous things against the God of gods. And he will prosper until the indignation is finished, for that which is decreed will be done. And he will show no regard for the gods of his fathers. And now this is Antichrist language here, it seems to me. Or for the desire of women. Nor will he show regard for any other god, for he will magnify himself above them all. So this guy is claiming, divinity. But instead he will honor a god of fortress, a god whom his fathers did not know. He will honor him with gold, silver, costly stones, and treasures. He will take action against the strongest of fortresses with the help of a foreign god, and he will give great honor to those who acknowledge him, and he will cause them to rule over the many, and he will parcel out land for a price. Now, listen to this in verse number 40. And at that time, at the end time, The king of the south will collide with him, and the king of the north will storm against him with chariots. So here's the same type language that's been found all through Daniel chapter 11, the fight between the king of the north and the king of the south. And it's a reference to, it's right in line with what we just reading about this guy who foreshadows the antichrist. And so many are persuaded that now we're reading about one of those final end time battles, and it's going to be between the leader of Syria and the leader of Egypt. And for that reason, some come to the conclusion that the Antichrist himself is revealed in this passage of Scripture as being a Syrian. Okay? The other possibility, if you jumble it up a little bit, is an Egyptian king. Okay? But I think it's more clear that if it is one of those two, it'd be Syrian. And it goes about their battle. Again, verse number 41, he will also enter the beautiful land. That's got to be Israel again, because they're caught in the middle of those two nations. Many countries will fall, etc., etc. And his end does ultimately come. And I just running out of time. That's why I'm jumping ahead to verse number 45. Now, when we get into chapter 12, once again, the abomination of desolation is mentioned. It's not mentioned until verse number 7. And because we're so limited by time, let's just prove that we are reading now about the end times. Verse number 1 of chapter 12. Now at that time, Michael, the great prince, is an archangel, who stands guard over the sons of your people, will arise, and there will be a time, listen closely to this, there will be a time of distress such as has never occurred since there was a nation until that time, the greatest distress the world's ever seen. And at that time, your people, everyone who is found written in the book, will be rescued. Whew. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake, these to everlasting life, but the others to disgrace and everlasting contempt. So there's no doubt this is the final days we're reading about. And next time, we'll get into it even deeper. See you next time.
HeavenWord 7 is made possible by the financial support of viewers like you. Thank you.